severe performance anxiety. Some musicians are blessed to not have this, but after a few memorable bad performances, I realized that I struggled with this. I had to change my practice habits with a structured system that I call calendar blocking to regain my lost confidence. For the most part, my music career straddles that line between education and performance. In the past, I taught in secondary schools as a band director for 6 years. I also taught private lessons to young aspiring musicians and currently teach percussion at my dream job in a university in Texas. One thing that frequently comes up during lessons with my students is the role that nerves or anxiety play on your performance. To be honest, a little bit of nerves is okay. That means that you genuinely care about how you play. But it's that moment where you start thinking about all of those thoughts like, do I actually know this solo? Do I sound great? What does the audience think of? That it becomes a little bit more debilitating and it causes self-sabotage. Benjamin Franklin once said, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. After a few particularly demoralizing bad performances early in my career, I developed a system of learning my solos that involved dividing the solo into smaller bite-sized chunks. The chunks are played slower at first to help build confidence, and after making my way through the entire solo, I combined the sections of music into larger chunks until I can play a full run of the solo. Implementing this system with my students helped them see that solos are not learned overnight. In fact, slow growth is often better in the long run. It's entirely up to you if you want to use your phone, a computer, or the old school way of writing this down on a piece of paper. I've created a worksheet that I use with my students that I have linked down below in the description of this video. At the bare minimum, this is what you'll need. Of course, you're going to need your music solo, a practice journal of some way to write notes, a pencil or pen, a list of your upcoming performance dates, and a calendar or monthly planner. Step 1 is to number every measure in your solo. We need to know how long our solo is by the numbers. This will also help later on when we divide the solo into chunks. I like to begin with the end in mind when we move on to step 2. On your scratch paper, write down the performance date. Work your way backwards on the calendar by marking each similar day in all previous weeks before your performance. My target learning day is usually tied to some big milestone, like learning all of the notes and rhythms. And I always time this out to correspond about 3 to 4 weeks before any big performance day. This 3 to 4 week buffer allows me to become more mentally comfortable performing the solo. It also gives me more time to add polish to the musical shaping and performance presence behind my instrument. So in step 3, I'm going to divide my solo into quarters, thirds, and halves. I'm still going to work backwards here. Now that I know where the full reps start taking place, I divide the remaining amount of time between learning the solo into my quarters, thirds, and halves. This is where looking at the music may help. Say my solo is 50 measures. I want to split that into 50% halves, say 25 and 25. If the split happens in the middle of a phrase that ends around measure 46 instead of measure 50, I'm either going to round up or down to the nearest phrase ending. I prefer thinking more musically and less mathematically. I highly recommend spending at least 1 week for every musical chunk on this worksheet. So that means that the 50% chunks are going to take 2 weeks total, 1 week per half. Next, I'll split the solo into thirds, again, rounding up or down to the nearest phrase ending. Don't worry as you start dividing the solo if this is still not exactly a third of the solo. I still recommend taking at least 1 week per chunk, so this is going to take 3 weeks total for the thirds. If there's enough time in the semester or learning phase, break your solo up further into 25% chunks. This will now take 4 extra weeks, 1 week per quarter. Once you've figured out the various checkpoints, it will look something like this. In step 4, we're going to figure out the checkpoint metronome markings. We're aiming to keep things slow for as long as possible. Now, I know not everybody agrees with playing slow while learning. It takes an extraordinary amount of effort to not play things fast. But I've seen it also work wonders with my students, especially early in their development. One saying that often comes to mind is, fast practice equals slow results, slow practice equals fast results. I always pre-plan my checkpoint tempo jumps to help out with my learning. I know there's a ton of different philosophies about this, but my students tend to think more clearly when they play things slower for a longer point of time. This system is going to incorporate that into the plan. Now here's where the math part jumps in. There's one formula you'll need to help determine the slower tempos, and that's marked tempo times percentage equals new tempo. For example, if I want to find something that is 75% of a given tempo, I'll multiply the marked tempo by 0.75, which gives me my checkpoint speed. At the start, I recommend learning your 25% chunks at half speed. If you're keeping track, the formula for that is marked tempo times 0.5. Keep it at this tempo until you made it all the way through the 25% checkpoints. Once you reach the 33% chunks, increase the tempo range to about 65 to 75% of the tempo. Again, keep it at that range to help build confidence in the slightly larger music chunks. Once you reach the next milestone, the 50% chunks, increase the tempo to 75 to 85% tempo. And if you follow this, you'll find the full run chunks are still not up to the marked tempo. Like I mentioned earlier, I use that 3 to 4 week buffer to focus on my musicianship and performance presence behind the instrument. But I also use this time to focus on pushing my chops to the next level. The first week I play a full run, I'm trying to stay around the 85% tempo, and then I'll increase it to 92% of the tempo the next week. I'll finally hit 100% tempo 1 to 2 weeks before I play any performance. So that's it, a stepped system to plan learning into manageable checkpoints. So whatever happened to that performance anxiety I mentioned earlier? My anxiety was a result of second guessing if I put in enough work to perform well. Most of it went away when I developed this method to learn my solo. The other parts of my anxiety came from things like low mental focus, poor eating and sleeping habits, and an unhealthy fixation on achieving the perfect performance. When I stuck to the system, I felt more confident because I knew that I was putting in the reps. By the time you reach the end of this learning process, you'll have played through the entire solo at least 6 times on paper. But realistically, it's even more than that. Since each week intentionally focuses on a small section of the music, you can repeat that section as many times as you like during the week. Another benefit to the system is the knowledge that you have a plan in place to learn your solo. My students may choose a solo and just see the mountain of work that's ahead of them. It's frankly overwhelming, and I sympathize with that. Now they can walk into a practice room and not have to feel like they need to learn the entire solo in this one practice session. They can escape that feeling of dread that comes with feeling behind in the learning curve. I'm paraphrasing Margaret Thatcher here, but plan your work and work the plan. Once you put it in the calendar, all that's left is to just work the plan. Show up every day and be the best musician you can be. I'm interested in knowing what you think. What strategies have you come up with to help you learn a piece of music? Let me know down in the comments. Until next time, keep making music and enjoy spending that time on your instrument. Thank you for watching.